Ruth Calloway pressed her dead son's boot against her chest and made a decision standing over 2 graves in the rain. She was done. Done with Abilene. Done with the house that still smelled like Jesse. Done with the clock on the mantel that had stopped the exact hour Daniel drew. His last breath stopped, like even time itself had given up. She packed 1 saddlebag, left everything else, and rode west into a Texas sky the color of a bruise. She was not looking for anything. She was not going anywhere. She was simply leaving. And she told herself that a woman with nothing left had nothing left to lose. If this story already has your hands pressed to your heart, subscribe to this channel right now. Follow every single part through to the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning Ruth Calloway rode out of Abilene, Kansas, the undertaker was still settling the final bill. She did not wait for it, or she had signed what needed signing, given the undertaker's wife a nod that was meant to pass for gratitude, and walked out of that office into the flat white glare of an August morning without looking back at the building or the street, or the 2 fresh stones at the edge of the cemetery she had not been able to visit a second time. Once was enough. Once had nearly ended her. She had Jesse's left boot in her saddlebag. Just the one. The right one had gone into the Red River with him, and she had not gone in after it, because she had gone in after the boy, and that had taken everything she had, and it had not been enough, and she was not going to think about that now, or ever again, if she could help it. She was not going to think about Daniel either, about the way he had looked at her from the bed in those final 3 days, still trying to reassure her. Still trying to manage things, still being Daniel, even while the infection ate through him. Because that was the kind of man he was, and it had killed him just as surely as the horse that had thrown him. She was going to think about the road west, nothing else. Clementine moved easy under her, a red roan mare with more sense than most people Ruth had known, and Ruth gave her her head and let the miles come. The Texas Panhandle opened up around her the way it always did when you crossed the state line, vast and indifferent, and not the least bit interested in what you had survived to get there. She found that comforting. The land didn't look at her with that expression, the particular one. The one that was half sorrow and half relief that it had happened to her and not to them. She had stopped being able to tolerate that expression somewhere around the 4th week. The storm built behind her through the afternoon, the way Texas storms did, without permission and without apology. She smelled it first, that particular copper smell of rain on baked earth that meant what was coming was not a gentle thing. Then Clementine's ears went flat, and the mare broke her easy walk without being asked, pulling north toward a ridge of broken land she seemed to find promising. Ruth looked back over her shoulder. The sky was wrong. Not just dark moving. Rotating in a slow, deliberate wheel that she recognized from childhood, from her father grabbing her arm and running from the particular sound of the wind dropping to nothing right before everything got very loud. "All right," she said to Clementine. "All right, go." The mare went. Ruth pressed flat against Clementine's neck and felt the first fat drops hit her back like thrown stones. And then the wind came sideways, and mean and lightning split the dark somewhere close enough that she heard it and felt it at the same time, a crack that went straight through her sternum. Clementine screamed and nearly went sideways, and Ruth gripped with her knees and said through her teeth, "Don't you quit on me. Don't you dare." She did not know why her voice cracked on the word quit. She did not have time to think about it because Clementine crested the ridge and Ruth saw it. A farmhouse, a barn. A single lamp burning in the window like something that had decided to stay lit on purpose. She did not make a decision about going toward it. She simply went. The porch was narrow, and the door was solid, and she hit it with the flat of her fist 3 times because the thunder was rolling so loud she couldn't hear herself think, let alone shout. Clementine was tied to the rail behind her, pulling hard against it, and the rain was coming in sheets now, not weather anymore, but something more like punishment. She hit the door a 4th time. It opened. The man on the other side of it was not what she expected, though she could not have said what she expected. He was tall, built for work rather than for show, with dark hair that needed cutting, and 3 days of beard and eyes that were in the particular quality of the lamplight behind him, impossible to read. He held the lamp in one hand. Against his chest in the crook of his other arm, wrapped in what looked like a kitchen towel because it was clearly not a proper blanket, was an infant. The infant was the color of something wrong, not crying. That was what struck Ruth first before the color before anything. A newborn not crying was not a peaceful thing. It was the opposite of a peaceful thing. "Get inside," the man said. Ruth got inside. The farmhouse was one main room, a kitchen along the back wall, a narrow stair going up. There was a boy sitting at the table. 11, maybe 12, with his father's jaw and his mother's. Ruth stopped herself from finishing that thought. The boy was sitting very straight and very still and looking at the infant in his father's arms, with an expression no 11-year-old should know how to make. "She won't cry," the man said. He wasn't talking to Ruth. He was talking to himself, or to the room, or to some version of God he wasn't sure was listening. "She was crying, and now she won't. She won't wake up right. She's—" "How old?" Ruth said. He looked at her then, really looked at her. "What did ye, the baby? How old?" 3 days. Ruth was already crossing the room. "What's her name?" "Iris." "Has she eaten today?" The man's jaw went hard. "She won't take the bottle right. She takes some, and then she stops. And I can't. The woman who was supposed to come and help, she got held up in the storm and she hasn't— Is there a wet nurse in town?" "Town's 9 miles east." "Cow's milk. You got it." "Yes." "Warmed." Yes, I can do that." "Do it now." Ruth held out her hands. "Give her to me." The man did not move. His arms tightened around the infant. Something crossed his face that was not refusal. It was more complicated than refusal. It was the look of a man who has been holding the last thing he has left and is being asked to let go of it. "I'm not a doctor," Ruth said before he could ask. "I'm not a midwife. My mother was. I've helped with 6 births, and I've brought 2 babies through the first bad week when the mother wasn't there to do it." She kept her hands out. "Give her to me." The boy at the table said quietly, "Pa." The man looked at his son. Something passed between them that Ruth couldn't read, some communication that had been built by months or years of working next to each other and didn't need words. He held the infant out. Ruth took Iris and felt it the particular frightening lightness of a newborn that hadn't been eating right, the skin slightly cool at the extremities, the breathing shallow but present. She turned the baby and put her cheek close to the tiny face and felt the breath. There. Faint, but there. "She's not dying," Ruth said, and she said it clearly and firmly, because the man needed to hear it more than she needed to hedge. "She's struggling, but she's not dying. The milk do that now." He moved. He was a man who, given something specific to do, would do it. She could see that about him immediately. Ruth walked, not pacing. She had seen him starting to pace when she came in. And pacing was anxiety in motion, and babies felt anxiety the way plants felt drought at the roots before anything showed on the surface. She walked with intention. Slow, even deliberate. She held Iris against her chest, and she started to hum, not a song exactly, just a shape of something. The memory of a lullaby she had hummed to Jesse when he was cutting teeth and couldn't sleep. She had not hummed it since. Iris stirred. Not dramatically. Just the smallest adjustment of a tiny body toward warmth and sound, the instinctive orientation of something very new that was trying to decide whether the world was safe. "She's moving," the boy said. "I see," Ruth said. "I'm Will," the boy said. "Will Hargrove. That's my pa Cole." "Ruth Calloway." "You passing through?" "I was." Will was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She needs her mama." He said it the way children said true things, without softening, without strategy, just straight into the air. Ruth felt it land. She kept humming.
This story
"I
was
know she
posted on the
does,"
channel The
she
Rusty
said.
Saddle.
"Our mama
Please do
died."
not repost it
He
in
said
any
that
form.
the same way. Direct. Like he had decided that if he said it plain enough times, it would stop feeling like a blade every time. 3 days ago, when Iris came, Ruth stopped walking. She turned to look at Will Hargrove, who was sitting at his father's table with his back straight and his jaw set, and his eyes dry in the particular way of a boy who has decided for his father's sake that he is not going to be one more thing that needs tending. "What's your name again?" Ruth said. "Will." "Will." She said it back to him like she was measuring it, like she was making sure she had it right. "I'm very sorry about your mother." "Yes, ma'am." He looked at his hands. "Pa hasn't slept." Cole came back from the kitchen with the warmed milk in a bottle Ruth recognized as the kind used when there was no other choice. A rolled cloth nipple on a small glass vial, crude but functional. He handed it to her. His fingers were steady. His eyes were not. Ruth sat down in the chair nearest the fire. Though the fire wasn't lit, Summer, no need, and she angled Iris and tried the bottle. Iris turned away from it. Ruth waited. She pulled the bottle back, let the baby fuss, offered it again. Cole stood 3 feet away, watching her with the helpless, specific attention of a man who has hit the absolute outer limit of what he knows how to do. "Sit down," Ruth said. "I'm fine." "You're wound tight as a watch spring, and she can feel it. Sit down." Cole sat. "How long since she slept?" Ruth said. She was still watching Iris, still offering the bottle with patient, deliberate repetitions. "Nora or me?" "You." "Night before the birth. I was up with her through the labor. Haven't slept since." 3 days. "I've gone longer during calving season." "Calving season doesn't require you to keep a newborn alive at the same time." Ruth felt Iris's mouth finally close around the cloth nipple, tentative, suspicious, then more firmly. She kept very still. "There she is. Good girl." Will let out a breath from the table. It was the longest breath Ruth had ever heard a child release. Everything he'd been holding for 3 days leaking out in one exhale. Cole leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and pressed his fists against his mouth and stared at his daughter drinking. "I didn't know what I was doing wrong," he said. His voice was rough at the edges, the way stone gets rough when water's been working at it for too long. "I've raised cattle and horses, and I've pulled calves, and I've set fence in weather that would drive most men back inside, and I did not know what I was doing wrong with a 7-pound baby." "Nothing," Ruth said. "You weren't doing anything wrong? She's 3 days old. She's trying to figure out how to live. That takes time." He looked at her. "You talk to babies like they can hear you. They can hear you long before they understand you. They hear the truth in it." She kept her eyes on Iris. "Your daughter has been listening to a man who loves her more than he knows what to do with and is terrified of losing her. She needs someone calm, that's all, not a doctor, just calm." Silence. Outside, the storm was working itself into a fury, the kind of Texas storm that had opinions and intended to share them. Lightning hit something nearby, and the windows shook, and Will didn't flinch, which told Ruth that Will had gotten very good at not flinching. "You said your mother was a midwife," Cole said. "She was." "Where are you from?" "Abilene." "Long way from home." "It's not home anymore." She said it flatly as a fact, without an invitation to push further. Cole heard the edge of it, and didn't push. She noticed that about him. He knew where the edges were. Iris finished most of the bottle. Her eyes were drooping, that sudden infant surrender to sleep that looked almost like someone had simply switched off a light. Ruth kept very still through the last of it. The transfer from wakefulness to sleep in a newborn was its own kind of negotiation, and she remembered it. She remembered it with a precision that was still sharp enough to cut. When Iris was fully under, Ruth stood with her crossed to the wooden cradle in the corner that someone had clearly assembled recently, the wood still pale, the joints tight and careful, a man's work done with deliberate love, and she lowered the baby into it with the slowness the moment required. The last 3 inches were everything. She knew that. She held her breath through them. Iris settled, sighed once, did not wake. Ruth straightened. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for exactly 1 second. Then she turned around. Cole was watching her. Will was watching her. And in the particular quality of both of their gazes, she could feel the question that neither of them had asked yet. "Who are you?" Cole said. "Actually, I told you. You told me your name. That's not what I asked." Ruth looked at him across the room. The storm pushed against the windows like it had somewhere to be, and was annoyed about the delay. Iris breathed in the cradle, even and slow the breathing of a baby who had decided, at least for now, that the world was survivable. "I'm a woman who just watched her husband take 3 days to die from an infected leg," Ruth said, "and who pulled her 5-year-old son out of a river 14 days after that and couldn't pull him far enough." She kept her voice level. She had gotten very good at keeping her voice level. "I packed 1 bag 8 days later and rode west because the house was going to kill me if I stayed in it. I don't have a destination. I don't have a plan. I saw your lamp and the sky was coming apart, and I knocked on your door." She paused. "That's who I am." Not one sound in the room. Then Will said, in the voice of an 11-year-old boy, saying something he had thought through carefully, "I'm sorry about your son." Ruth looked at him. Something in her chest, that had been clenched and frozen for 2 months, made a sound she didn't have words for. "Thank you, Will," she said. Cole stood from the chair. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 tin cups of water and set one in front of Ruth without asking if she wanted it. He sat back down. He turned his cup in his hands. "Her name's Iris," he said. "Nora picked it. She wanted something. She said she wanted the baby to have a name that meant something would grow." His voice went careful around his wife's name, the way you go careful around something that's still raw enough to bleed. She had a whole garden planned. She was always planning things ahead. He looked at the cradle. She didn't make it to morning. Ruth looked at her cup. What was she like? Cole seemed surprised by the question. Most people didn't ask that. Most people said they were sorry and then talked about the practical things, the arrangements, who was going to help, how he was going to manage. Nobody asked what she was like, because asking what she was like required sitting with the answer. "Stubborn," he said, and something crossed his face that was not grief alone. It had warmth in it, and a specific quality of exasperation that only came from loving someone who drove you out of your mind. She had opinions about everything. The right way to hang a door, the right way to salt a stew. She was wrong about half of it, and she never once admitted it. A pause. "I would give everything I own to be wrong about a door hinge with her right now." Ruth felt the tears come to the back of her eyes and did not let them through. Not yet. She was not done being useful, and she could not afford to come apart in the middle of being useful. "Daniel hummed," she said. "My husband," under his breath while he was thinking. "He didn't know he did it. I used to tell him to stop when I was trying to read." She felt Jesse's boot against her spine in the saddlebag, felt the weight of it, like something physical pressing against her. "I would give everything I own to hear him hum right now." Cole looked at her. Something shifted in the careful, braced quality of his face. Not softening exactly, more like recognition. Will had fallen asleep at the table, his head on his arms, the boneless total collapse of a child who had been fighting sleep for too long. Cole looked at his son, and something passed over his expression that Ruth recognized without a name. The particular ache of watching someone you love suffer something you cannot fix for them. "He's been trying to be strong for me," Cole said quietly, so as not to wake the boy. "Since the morning after. Just held himself together and started doing chores and didn't say a word about his mother except once." He stopped. "What did he say?" Ruth asked. Cole was quiet for a moment. He said, "Pa, who's going to teach Iris to read." His jaw tightened. Just that. Then he went out to feed the horses. He shook his head slowly. I didn't have an answer for him. Ruth looked at Will sleeping. At the set of his young shoulders, even in sleep, that careful bracing that a boy learned
This
too
story
young
was
and would
posted on
carry
the
too
channel
long.
The Rusty Saddle.
She knew that
Please do not
posture.
repost it in any
She had
form.
seen it on herself in the mirror for 2 months. "He'll find one," Ruth said. "Kids find them, even when we can't." Cole leaned back in his chair. He studied her with the particular directness of a man who has been worn down past the point of being indirect. "Why are you really here, Ruth Calloway?" She looked at him steadily. "I told you. The storm. The storm's what brought you to the door. That's not what I'm asking." She looked at Iris in the cradle. She looked at Will sleeping at the table. She looked at the lamp burning on the mantel, and the darkness pressing against the windows, and the cup of water he had set in front of her without asking. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I've been moving so fast I haven't had room to figure it out." She wrapped both hands around the tin cup. "But your daughter drank, and your son is sleeping, and right now that feels like enough of a reason." Cole said nothing. Outside, the storm finally crested and began slowly the way storms did out here to spend itself out. The thunder moved east, and what was left behind it was just rain, steady and without fury, the kind that meant the worst was over. Ruth stayed in the chair. Cole stayed in his. Between them, Iris breathed in her cradle, even and small and impossibly alive. And somewhere in the deep, cold, locked-down part of Ruth Calloway that she had stopped believing would ever move again, something shifted. Not much, not enough to name, but enough to notice, enough to mean something. She reached into her coat pocket and touched Daniel's watch. Still stopped, still cold. She left it there and picked up her water instead. "Tell me about the farm," she said. "What needs doing?" Cole looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression, the guardedness, the bracing, the 1,000-yard stare of a man managing catastrophe alone, shifted just a fraction. "More than I can do with one pair of hands," he said. "Then you've got 2 pair tonight," Ruth said. "Tell me where to start," Cole told her. He told her the way a man talked who had been keeping inventory of his own disasters for 3 days straight methodically, without self-pity. The way you list things that need fixing when you have stopped having the luxury of feeling bad about them. The east fence line was down from the last storm 2 weeks back. The horses hadn't been properly seen to since Nora went into labor. He had 2 ranch hands who came in daylight hours, but neither one of them knew what to do with a newborn, and neither did he. And Will had been trying to manage the kitchen on his own, which meant they had been eating biscuits that were more ambition than execution for 3 days running. Ruth listened. She asked 3 questions and let him talk through the rest. When he was done, she said, "I can take the nights. Iris wakes every 2 hours, maybe 3 if she settles well. You need to sleep in actual increments, or you're going to be useless to her during the day, and you know it. I'm not leaving my daughter with a stranger through the night. I'm the stranger who just got her to eat for the first time today." Ruth kept her voice even. "You can stay on the couch if it makes you easier. But you need to close your eyes, Cole. She needs you functional, more than she needs you present and half dead." He looked at her with that careful measuring look she was already starting to recognize, searching for the catch, looking for what it cost. "Why would you do that?" he said. "Because I can't sleep anyway," she said. "Haven't slept a full night in 2 months. Might as well be useful while I'm awake." That landed differently than she intended. She could see it on his face, not pity, something more uncomfortable than pity. Recognition. "All right," he said finally. "One night?" "One night." Ruth agreed. She did not sleep. She had told him the truth about that. She sat in the chair beside Iris's cradle, and she watched the baby breathe, and she listened to the rain ease itself down from a roar to a murmur to a whisper. And she thought about Jessie the way she always thought about Jessie in the dark. Not as a memory with clean edges, but as a presence, a warmth on the left side of her chest that had nowhere to go. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and breathed until it passed. Iris woke at what Ruth estimated was close to 2 in the morning, not crying so much as announcing herself that particular newborn sound that was less distress and more inquiry, a testing of the world to see if the world would answer. Ruth was at the cradle before the sound had fully formed. She picked Iris up with the practiced slowness of muscle memory that had not forgotten anything, no matter how hard she had tried to make it. "I know," she whispered. "I know, little one. It's still night. But I've got you." Iris looked at her. 3 days old and already looking. That was the thing about newborns that undid people who weren't prepared for it. They were not passive. They were paying ferocious attention to everything. Ruth warmed the milk. She fed Iris in the dark, standing at the kitchen window, and outside the storm had cleaned everything, and the stars were coming back out one at a time, and the land was silver and wet and enormous in the way that West Texas land was always enormous, indifferent and vast, and not the least bit interested in the smallness of what happened on top of it. She did not find that comforting the way she had earlier. She found it accurate. Iris ate better this time. Not perfectly, but better. She drank 3/4 of the bottle before her eyes started their slow, inevitable closing, and Ruth walked the kitchen floor with her slow and deliberate heel to toe, humming the shape of the thing that was not quite a song. She was still walking when she heard the footstep on the stair. Will came down barefoot, hair mashed sideways from the couch where his father had apparently put him after he fell asleep at the table. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at Ruth and at Iris, and at the dark kitchen with the expression of a boy who had woken up expecting something bad and was recalibrating. "She okay?" he whispered. "She's fine. Go back to sleep, Will." He didn't go back to sleep. He came and sat in the chair at the kitchen table and pulled his knees up and watched Ruth walk with his sister, the way he'd been watching everything for 3 days, with that careful, exhausted vigilance of a child who has decided that if he pays close enough attention, he can prevent the next terrible thing. "You don't have to watch," Ruth said softly. "I know. But you're going to anyway." "Yes, ma'am." She almost smiled. The almost of it surprised her. "You're a lot like your father." Ma used to say that. She didn't always mean it as a compliment. He said it with the ghost of something that might have been humor in another circumstance. Ruth recognized the shape of it the way people who were grieving sometimes found the edges of something that used to be funny, and held on to it carefully, like sea glass, smooth and small and salvaged. "Tell me something about her," Ruth said. Will looked at his hands. "She sang bad, really bad. Pa used to plug his ears and she'd just sing louder." A pause. She thought that was the funniest thing in the world, making him do that. Ruth kept walking, heel to toe. Iris's breath had gone deep and even against her shoulder. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Ruth said. She was just Ma." His voice caught on the word, and he let it catch and kept going. "She was just always there. That's the thing. She was just always there, and now she's not, and the house keeps being the same house, and that's—" He stopped. He started again. "That's the weirdest part. The house is the same." "I know," Ruth said quietly. "The house being the same is the hardest part. You're right about that." He looked up at her. "Did it feel like that for you too?" "Yes." "Does it stop feeling like that?" Ruth thought about lying. She thought about the comfortable, protective lie that adults told children about grief because the truth felt too heavy to hand to someone so young. Then she thought about Will's straight back and his dry eyes and the 3 days he'd spent being strong for his father, and she decided he had earned the truth. "It changes," she said carefully. "It doesn't stop, but it changes. The house stops feeling wrong and starts feeling like a place where they were. And that's different from the place where they aren't." She paused. "It takes longer than anyone tells you." Will was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nobody tells you anything real. They just say sorry and bring food, and then they leave and we're still here." "Yes," Ruth said. "That's exactly right. You're the first person who said something real." He looked at her with the sudden direct assessment of a child who has been paying very close attention. Why did you stay tonight? Because your sister needed someone calm. Pause calm. Your father is a man running on 3 days of no sleep, and a level of fear
This
that
story
would
was
bring most
posted on the
people to their
channel The
knees.
Rusty Saddle.
That's not
Please
the
do
same
not
as
repost
calm.
it in any form.
She said it without judgment. He's doing everything right. He just needs to sleep. Will looked toward the other room where Cole had finally 2 hours ago let himself lie down. He blames himself, Will said, for Ma. He thinks if he'd gotten the doctor sooner, Will. Ma'am, that's your father's to carry. Don't pick it up for him. The boy went still. Then he nodded once slowly, the nod of someone who had just been handed a sentence they needed. Ruth lowered Iris back into the cradle with the careful precision the moment required. She held her breath through the last 3 inches. Iris settled without protest, small chest rising and falling, the monumental achievement of a new life deciding to keep going. Ruth straightened and looked at Will. Go sleep. I mean it this time. He got up. He paused at the bottom of the stair. Miss Calloway. Ruth. Ruth. He tried it on, found it acceptable. Thank you for staying. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for talking to me, she said. He went up the stairs. Ruth sat back down in her chair and looked at Iris sleeping and pressed Daniel's stopped watch between her palms and sat with the dark and the quiet and the extraordinary fact of being somewhere instead of nowhere. The morning came in the way mornings came after bad nights, tentatively at first, then all at once. Ruth heard Cole before she saw him, his boots on the stair, the particular weight and pattern of them that she had already, without meaning to, filed away as familiar. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her still in the chair, Iris asleep in the cradle. Will's voice coming from outside, where he had apparently gotten up before either of them and started on the horses. Cole looked at Ruth. He looked at Iris. Something moved across his face. You stayed up, he said. I told you I would. I thought you'd wake me after an hour. You needed more than an hour. She stood working the stiffness out of her back. She woke twice, took the bottle both times, better than yesterday. Cole crossed to the cradle and crouched beside it and looked at his daughter the way he always looked at her, confirming her, making sure she was still real. He reached out and touched her cheek with one finger. Just once. The touch of a man who could not help himself. She's warmer, he said. She's eating, that's what does it. He stood. He looked at Ruth, and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen there before. Something that sat underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the caution. Something that looked a lot like the specific discomfort of a man who did not know how to receive help gracefully because he had spent too long not needing it. I owe you, he said. You don't. Ruth, make coffee, she said. That'll settle it. He almost smiled. It didn't make it all the way to his face, but it arrived somewhere close. He went to the kitchen. They drank the coffee standing on opposite sides of the kitchen in the early light, and Will came in from the horses with hay on his jacket and the look of a boy who had done real work and knew it, and was not going to make a point of saying so. And he accepted his coffee with the solemnity of a 40-year-old man, and the 3 of them stood in the kitchen and did not speak, and it was Ruth realized with a start not uncomfortable. She was not good at other people's silences. She had spent 2 months filling them or fleeing them, but this one had a quality to it she couldn't immediately name. It was occupied. Something was living in it. I need to ride into town, Cole said. Supplies. And I need to send a wire to Nora's mother in Missouri. She doesn't know yet. He stopped. The cost of that sentence was visible on his face. I've been putting it off. I'll stay with Iris, Ruth said. He looked at her. You don't have to. Cole. She said his name the way she'd said it to Clementine in the storm, clear, without room for argument. I'll stay with Iris. Will can show me where things are. Go do what needs doing. He held her gaze for a moment. She could see him doing the calculation, the same calculation she could see was costing him something, the calculation of a man who had learned in the last 3 days that leaving meant things could happen while you were gone, and you could not take that back. "I won't let anything happen to her," Ruth said. And she meant it in the way she had not meant anything in 2 months, from the part of her that had nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. Cole put his hat on. He was out the door in 5 minutes. Ruth stood in the suddenly quiet house and listened to the hoofbeats until she couldn't hear them anymore. Will looked at her from the table. "He hasn't left since Ma died," he said. "Not once." "I know." "You must have said something right." Ruth looked at the boy. "I just said I'd stay." Will nodded like that was both simple and enormous, which it was. She learned the house that morning, the way you learned any place where people had lived, by the things they left behind, the arrangement of objects that told you who they were before you got there. Nora Hargrove had been organized in the kitchen, and particular about her herb jars, which were labeled in a handwriting that was small and precise, and somehow still full of personality. She had kept a sewing basket by the window, where the light was best. She had pinned a piece of paper above the fireplace, with measurements written on it, that Ruth eventually understood were the dimensions of a garden bed she had planned to put in on the south side of the house. Ruth stood looking at that paper for a long time. "She drew it out last winter," Will said from behind her. "She was going to do it in the spring, but then she was sick a lot through the last months, and then—" He shrugged in the way of someone who has run out of ways to finish a sentence. "Larkspur would do well on that south side," Ruth said. "Good drainage." Will looked at her. "You garden?" "I used to." She turned away from the paper. "What needs doing in the house today?" He told her. He told her with the same methodical inventory his father had used the night before, and she understood then where he had learned it not just from Cole, but from watching Cole, from years of standing next to a man who dealt with problems by naming them and then addressing them in order. She found it steadying. She found it against every expectation something close to comforting. They worked through the morning. Ruth managed Iris between tasks, feeding her on schedule, walking her when she fussed, talking to her in the low, steady voice that seemed to reach her when nothing else did. Will did the heavier work, the hauling and the sweeping, with the focused determination of a boy who needed something physical to do with his grief. They worked around each other easily with the natural accommodation of people who were both used to working alone and were quietly grateful not to be. At mid-morning, Iris began to cry. Not the tentative questioning cry of before. A different register. Ruth was at the cradle in seconds, and she put her hand on the baby's forehead and went still. Hot. Too hot for 3 hours after a feeding. Too hot for a baby who had been doing better. "Will," she said. He was already at her shoulder. He looked at Iris. His face went the color of chalk. "She's got a fever," Ruth said. "How far is the nearest neighbor who's had children?" "Mrs. Sweeney," he said immediately. "At the trading post, 9 miles east. She's had 7. Is there a faster way than the road?" "Through the canyon run. Cuts it to 6. He was already moving toward the door. "I can go." "Can you ride fast?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then go. Tell Mrs. Sweeney the baby is 3 days old and running a fever, and we need her now." He grabbed his hat. He paused at the door and looked back at Ruth, standing over the cradle with his sister in her arms. His face was doing something complicated and very young and very old at the same time. "You'll be here," he said. Not a question. Something else. Something that needed answering a certain way. Ruth looked at him directly. "I'll be here, Will." He went. She heard him take the horse at a run. Heard the hoofbeats fade fast through the canyon direction, and then there was just the house and the morning, and Iris crying against her shoulder, and Ruth walking slow and deliberate heel to toe, talking the whole time in the low, steady voice that she had learned through Jesse's worst nights and his best ones. And every ordinary night in between was the most useful thing one person could offer another when everything else had run out. "You're all right," she said. "You are not as sick as you feel. I know you're little, and everything is enormous right now. But you're going to be fine." Her voice held. She was proud of that. "You hear me, Iris? You're going to be fine, because I am not going to let you be anything else."
This story was
And
posted on the
underneath that
channel The
quiet as a
Rusty
current,
Saddle.
underneath a
Please
river's
do not
surface,
repost
was
it
the
in
thing
any
she
form.
did not say out loud. She had said those same words before, to a boy named Jesse, who had laughed with his whole body and run everywhere he went and called her mama, like it was the answer to every question. She had said those words and meant them with everything she had, and it had not been enough. She knew that. She held Iris tighter anyway, and she kept walking. The fever did not break, and it did not climb, and that was the only mercy Ruth asked for in the hour that followed. She worked the way her mother had taught her, methodically, without panic, because panic was a luxury that sick children could not afford on your behalf. Cool cloth from the basin water that was not cold enough to shock, but cool enough to matter, pressed to Iris's forehead, and the soft creases of her tiny wrists where the pulse ran close to the surface. She kept talking. She kept walking. She kept the rhythm of her steps even and slow, because the rhythm was the thing. The steady insistence of it, the refusal to hurry the body-level communication to an infant who could not understand words but understood entirely the difference between a person who was frightened and a person who was not. Ruth was frightened. She did not let it into her feet. She talked to Iris about practical things first, the things that kept her own mind from going to the places it wanted to go. She talked about the herb jars in Nora's kitchen and the way they were labeled and what each one was used for. She talked about the garden plan pinned above the fireplace, the south-facing bed that would get full sun from April through September, the way Larkspur liked dry feet and full light, and came back year after year once it was established, reliable and purple and completely indifferent to hard winters. She talked about Jesse once, just once briefly, almost by accident. "My boy loved storms," she told Iris, who was fussing against her shoulder with the thin, exhausted sound of a baby fighting something she couldn't name. He'd stand at the window with both hands on the glass and watch the lightning, and he wasn't scared at all. Not one bit. I was terrified every time, and he thought that was hilarious. She paused. She breathed through it. He was 5 years old, and he already thought his mother was funny. That's a good thing to have been. Iris made a sound. Not crying, something else. Something that Ruth chose to interpret as acknowledgement, which she understood was not rational and did not care. "I know," she said. "I know." She heard them before she saw them, 2 horses coming fast from the east, not the canyon direction Will had taken, but the main road, and for one disorienting second she thought it was Cole back early. Then the horses pulled up at the porch rail, and she heard a woman's voice giving instructions with the flat authority of someone who was used to being listened to, and then the door opened. Dorothy Sweeney was exactly what her name suggested. She wasn't, not soft, not sweet, not anyone's idea of a gentle presence. She was a broad-shouldered woman of 58, with gray hair pinned back without ceremony, and hands that had done real work for 4 decades, and looked it. She came through the door, already pulling her coat off, already assessing, already in motion. Will was 2 steps behind her, slightly out of breath from the ride, watching Mrs. Sweeney, the way people watched force of nature types, with a mixture of relief and the vague concern that she might reorganize everything while she was there. "Let me see her," Mrs. Sweeney said. Ruth held Iris out without hesitation. Mrs. Sweeney took the baby with the confident grip of someone who had caught 7 of her own, pressed her lips to Iris's forehead the way Ruth had done, pulled back with an expression that was serious but not catastrophic. She turned Iris in her hands, checked the color of her gums, listened to her breathing, with her ear close to the tiny chest. "Fever's real," she said. "Not the worst I've seen on a newborn. Not the best either." She looked at Ruth directly. "How long?" "I found it about an hour ago. She was warm this morning, but I thought it was the feeding settling. It climbed fast. She eat today. Twice. Took most of the bottle both times. Better than yesterday." Mrs. Sweeney handed Iris back to Ruth. Not to Will. To Ruth, with the matter-of-fact decisiveness of a woman who had assessed something and made a judgment and was not interested in explaining it. Keep doing what you're doing. She knows your arms by now. 3 days is long enough. She turned to Will. You got willow bark in this house? Yes, ma'am. Pa keeps it in the cabinet on the left. Get it. Will got it. Mrs. Sweeney sat up at the kitchen table with the willow bark and a pot of water and the focused efficiency of someone running a familiar operation in an unfamiliar kitchen, which she clearly found mildly irritating but entirely manageable. She worked and she talked, which Ruth understood was not small talk, it was assessment. You the one who came in during the storm? Mrs. Sweeney said. Yes, ma'am. Will says you got the baby eating last night. She needed someone calm. She needed her mother. Mrs. Sweeney said not unkindly. Ain't got one. You're what there is. She stirred the pot. Where are you from? Abilene, originally. Originally. Mrs. Sweeney repeated the word with the particular intonation of a woman who heard what was underneath it. You got people there still. A brother-in-law, my husband's family. And you're here. Storm brought me here. Mrs. Sweeney looked up from the pot. She looked at Ruth the way women of her generation looked at things they were trying to accurately price with a comprehensive, unsentimental attention that took in considerably more than the surface. Storm brought you to the door, she said. Something else made you stay. She went back to the pot. Not criticizing, just naming what I see. Ruth said nothing. She kept walking with Iris heel to toe, heel to toe. Nora Hargrove was a good woman, Mrs. Sweeney said after a moment. Stubborn as a post, which I mean as a compliment. She knew what she wanted, and she went after it, and she didn't ask permission, and she loved that family of hers like it was a religion. A pause. Cole's been out here alone for 3 days with a newborn and a grieving boy, and he hasn't asked one soul for help because asking for help is not in his vocabulary. I noticed, Ruth said. He let you stay. He didn't have a choice. His daughter needed. He had a choice, Mrs. Sweeney said. Cole Hargrove always has a choice. He's just not usually inclined to make the one that lets somebody else carry something. She poured the brewed liquid into a small cup and brought it to Ruth. Get this into her a drop at a time. Takes patience. I have patience. I can see that. Mrs. Sweeney stood back and crossed her arms and watched Ruth administer the willow bark tea to Iris with the drop-by-drop persistence of someone who understood that certain things could not be hurried. Where'd you learn this? My mother. She a midwife. Was. Mrs. Sweeney nodded. She asked no more about that. She was a woman who knew where the edges were and respected them, which Ruth found she was grateful for, in a way that surprised her with its intensity. It was 40 minutes before they heard Cole's horse. He came through the door, fast hat in hand, and he took in the room in one sweep. Mrs. Sweeney at the table. Will standing by the window. Ruth with Iris against her shoulder, and something in him that had been wound to the breaking point during the 9-mile ride back, released in a single visible exhale. She's through the worst of it, Mrs. Sweeney said before he could ask. Fever's answering the bark. Give her the rest of the day and tonight, and she'll be easier by morning. Cole crossed to Ruth. He did not take Iris. He just stood close and looked at his daughter's face, and then at Ruth, and the look on his face was something Ruth did not have a word for and did not try to find one. You were here, he said. I said I would be. I know. He looked down. I know you did. Mrs. Sweeney put her coat on with the brisk efficiency of a woman with 6 miles to cover before dark, and no interest in being present for whatever came next. She stopped at the door and looked at Ruth and said in the voice of someone delivering a final assessment, You're good at this. She's not hard to love, Ruth said, meaning Iris. I meant all of it, Mrs. Sweeney said. Then she looked at Cole. You've been managing alone too long. That's not a criticism. It's a diagnosis. She opened the door. Don't let her leave too fast. She was gone before either of them could respond to that. Will looked at his father. His father looked at the door. Ruth kept walking with Iris and did not say anything because she was not sure what there was to say. Cole went to the cabinet and took down a cup and then stood there with it in his hand and did not pour anything and did not move for a long moment. Then he set the cup down and turned around. "Hector Vance came to find me in town," he said. Ruth went still, not obviously, internally. "He knows you're here," Cole continued. He said it plainly without drama, which made it land harder than drama would have. "He came into the trading post while I was picking up supplies. Said he'd heard there was a woman from Abilene out at the Hargrove place. Said he thought that was interesting, given that she was supposed to be back home attending to legal matters." A pause. "He said it in front of 3 other men." Ruth kept her voice level. "What else did he say?" "That a widow
This
who
story
runs
was
off
posted
and
on the
abandons her
channel The
property and
Rusty
her
Saddle.
obligations
Please do not
isn't the
repost
kind
it
of
in
woman
any
a
form.
judge should be looking out for." Cole held her gaze. "I asked him what his business was with a woman he'd never met on property that wasn't his. He said your husband's share of the partnership was his by rights, and he intended to see it treated that way. He's wrong. I know he's wrong. I also know that men like Vance don't much care about being wrong when being wrong is inconvenient for them." He picked the cup back up and this time poured from the coffee that was still warm on the stove and set a second cup in front of where he expected Ruth to eventually sit. "He's going to make trouble." "He's been making trouble for 3 months, Ruth said. "He contested Daniel's life insurance through a county judge and lost. He'll try something else. That's what men like Hector Vance do, they try something else." She shifted Iris to her other shoulder. "I have a lawyer in Abilene who is considerably smarter than Hector Vance, which Hector Vance has not yet fully processed." "You're not worried." "I didn't say that." She looked at him. "I said he's wrong, and I have a lawyer. Those 2 things together are usually enough." Cole sat down. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at the table and said quietly, "He mentioned Jessie." The room went very quiet. "He said a woman who couldn't keep her own child safe had no business." Cole stopped. His jaw tightened to the point of visible strain. "I told him to get out of the trading post." "Did he?" "After a minute." Ruth stood very still. She kept her hand on Iris's back, kept the rhythm of it, kept herself in the motion, because the motion was the only thing between her and the thing Hector Vance's words had just kicked loose in her chest, the specific savage grief of being blamed for the thing she had failed to prevent, the thing that lived at the center of every bad night and every empty morning, and every moment she had pressed her hand to her sternum and told herself to breathe. She had not kept Jessie safe. She had gone in after him, and she had not been fast enough, and she had pulled him out, and it had not been enough, and there was not one morning in 62 days that she had not woken up carrying the full weight of that fact. "Ruth." Cole's voice. She looked up. "He was wrong," Cole said. "About all of it, but especially about that." She nodded. She could not speak for a moment. She turned slightly away from him, not to hide anything, just to need the second it took to get her voice back. Iris made a sound against her shoulder, small and sleepy and present. "I know he was wrong," Ruth said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "I know it. It's just some things you can know and still have them cut." She turned back. "Jessie fell into the Red River during spring runoff. I was 20 feet away. I went in after him." She met Cole's eyes. "The river was faster than I was. That's the whole truth of it. The river was faster." Cole said nothing. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say she couldn't have known. He did not say any of the things people said that were technically true and entirely useless. He said, "The river being faster than you doesn't make it your fault." Something in Ruth's chest broke open slightly. Not all the way, just at the seam. "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't. I'm still working on believing that." "Yeah." He looked at his coffee. I'm still working on believing Nora's death isn't mine to carry. That if I'd gotten the doctor sooner, if I'd made her rest more in the last weeks—" He stopped. "Will told me you said not to pick up his father's burdens." Ruth looked over at Will, who had sat down at the table and appeared to be deeply interested in a scratch in the wood surface. "I told him his father's grief was his father's to carry." "Smart advice," Cole said. "You follow it yourself." "I'm trying." She sat down finally, Iris warm and heavy against her chest. The baby's breathing gone slow and steady again. The fever still present, but no longer climbing. "I'm not very good at it yet." "Me neither." He looked up. "Seems like we're both trying to carry things we weren't built to put down." The afternoon settled around them quiet and careful. Will eventually produced biscuits that were better than his earlier attempts, which he presented with the understated pride of someone who had been practicing, and the three of them ate together at the kitchen table with Iris in the cradle beside them, making the small, contented sounds of a baby whose fever was retreating by degrees. It was the first meal that felt to Ruth like a meal, rather than a maintenance activity. Afterward, while Will washed the dishes with the focused solemnity he brought to all tasks, Cole stood and went to the shelf above the fireplace and took down a small wooden box that Ruth had not noticed before. He turned it in his hands for a moment and then set it on the table in front of her. "Nora kept things," he said. "Things she said she wanted when she was old." He paused on the word old in the specific way of someone who had been cheated out of it. "I put this away after she died because I thought it would be easier not to see it." He opened the box. Inside was a pressed flower purple, slightly faded, and a lock of dark hair tied with a ribbon and a folded piece of paper that Ruth recognized as a letter. "It's not easier." Ruth looked at the flower. She looked at it for a long moment. "That's larkspur," she said. Cole looked up. "What?" "The flower. It's larkspur. Same as what's growing on the south side of the property." She touched the edge of the box, not the contents, just the edge. "My mother-in-law called them summer's goodbye flowers. Said they always bloomed right at the end of the good season." Cole was quiet. He looked at the flower in the box with an expression that was grief, and something else, some complicated gratitude for being given the name of a thing he'd been living next to without knowing what to call it. "She never found out what it was," he said. "Spent 2 springs trying to identify it. Nobody around here knew." "Now you know," Ruth said. He closed the box. He did not put it back on the high shelf. He set it on the lower shelf, where he could see it from the table. And Ruth understood that, as a decision of some significance, the decision of a man who had just chosen to stop putting things away. "The letter from Abilene," Cole said then. "The one your brother-in-law sent. Did you read it?" Ruth looked at him. "How did you know about a letter?" "The supply run this morning. Postmaster flagged me down. Said there was something for a Ruth Calloway that Will had given your name when he came through 2 days ago for the milk supplies." He reached into his coat pocket and set an envelope on the table between them. "I didn't open it, didn't read it. But I reckon you should." Ruth looked at the envelope. Her name on it in her brother-in-law Thomas's handwriting, small and careful and faintly reproachful even in its letter forms. She picked it up. She did not open it immediately. She held it and looked at it and felt the particular weight of correspondence from people who had stayed put, the weight of a world that had continued without her making decisions moving forward, expecting her to come back and participate in the orderly conclusion of her own previous life. "He wants me to come back," she said, without opening it. She knew Thomas. She knew what it would say. "Settle the estate properly. Sign the final papers. The house—" She paused. "He says the house can't wait much longer." "Can it wait another week?" She looked up. Cole held her gaze with the careful, steady attention she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things that mattered. "Iris is sick. You know what you're doing with her. Will trusts you, and Will doesn't trust easily." He paused. "I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm asking if it can wait a week." Ruth looked at the envelope. She looked at Iris in the cradle's small chest rising and falling, the fever giving ground inch by inch. She looked at Will at the sink, who had been listening to every word with the particular quality of attention that pretended not to be listening. "A week," she said. "A week," Cole said. Ruth set the envelope in her coat pocket, and outside the window in the south-facing bed that no one had gotten around to planting yet. The wild larkspur
This story
that Nora
was
Hargrove
posted
had
on the
grown
channel
from
The
seed
Rusty
2
Saddle.
springs ago
Please do not
and never
repost it
gotten
in
to
any
name,
form.
bloomed purple in the late afternoon light, indifferent and faithful, the way things grew when someone had put them in the ground with enough love to carry them through the seasons without her. Neither Cole nor Ruth saw it just then, but Will did. He stood at the window and looked at it for a long moment, and he did not say anything to either of them. He just turned back to the dishes and kept washing, and somewhere in the set of his young shoulders, something had changed, some small and stubborn degree of the bracing had released. It was barely visible. It was everything. Iris's fever broke just before dawn on the second day. Ruth felt it before she confirmed it, some shift in the weight of the baby against her shoulder, some quality of the breathing that changed from labored to simply deep, the way a person breathes when they have stopped fighting something and are resting instead. She pressed her lips to Iris's forehead and held them there for 3 full seconds, and when she pulled back, the skin was cool and damp and ordinary. She sat down in the chair. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs and looked at the ceiling, and breathed in and breathed out, and did not let herself make a sound. It took her a full minute to trust it. She checked again. Still cool, still even. Iris's small mouth was working in sleep, the instinctive searching motion of a baby who was hungry and would be telling everyone about it shortly, but who was right now simply and completely fine. "She's through it," Ruth said to the room. Cole was awake across the room. He had not slept. She had known that, had felt the particular quality of his wakefulness, the way you felt a fire in the dark by its heat and its attention. He crossed to the cradle and crouched beside it and looked at his daughter for a long time without moving. He touched her cheek once. Just once. Then he stood and walked to the kitchen with his back to Ruth, and she heard it, one long shaking exhale, the kind that carries everything a man has been holding through a night that asked more of him than he had any right to still have. She gave him 60 seconds. Then she said, "I'll make the coffee." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yeah," he said, rough-voiced. "Yeah, all right." They drank it in the early gray light, with Will still asleep upstairs, and Iris breathing clean and easy in the cradle, and neither of them spoke about the night, not the fever, not the hours of walking and talking, and the specific kind of exhausted honesty that came out of people when everything unnecessary had been stripped away. They did not need to speak about it. It had happened. It was in the room with them, quiet and permanent the way real things were. Will came down at sunrise. He looked at Iris first, the way he always looked at Iris first now, with that particular vigilance of a boy who had decided that paying close enough attention was a form of protection. He studied his sister's face. He put his hand on the blanket near her feet. "She's cooler," he said. "Fever broke about an hour ago," Ruth said. Will sat down at the table and put his face in his hands for exactly 5 seconds. Then he put his hands down and straightened his back and said in the voice of someone changing the subject before anyone could witness something, "I'll go see to the horses." Cole looked at his son. "Will." The boy stopped. "Come here." Will came. Cole put his hand on the back of his son's neck and pulled him in briefly, firmly, the wordless physical language of a father and a boy who had been holding each other up for 2 weeks, and both knew it, and neither had said so. Will's hands came up and gripped his father's shirt for just a moment. Then Will stepped back. He straightened. "Horses," he said. "Yeah," Cole said. "Go." The boy went. Ruth looked at her coffee cup. "He's going to be all right," she said. "He's already most of the way there." "I know." Cole's voice was rough with everything the morning had cost him. "He's stronger than me, if I'm honest. He learned from somewhere." Cole looked at her. She hadn't intended it as a compliment exactly, just as accuracy. but she could see it landed somewhere useful, and she did not walk it back. The week that followed had a shape Ruth had not expected. Not dramatic, not momentous. Just the shape of days shared between people who had stopped pretending they weren't sharing them, the particular domestic rhythm of two adults and a child and an infant, moving through the hours with the natural accommodation of people who had each been operating alone long enough to appreciate the relief of not being so. Cole went out at first light. Ruth stayed in. They did not discuss this arrangement. It assembled itself the way water found its level, practical and without ceremony. The ranch hands, two quiet men named Bart and Ezra, who had been watching the situation at the main house with the careful peripheral attention of people who understood that something significant was happening and had no intention of commenting on it, began leaving Ruth small logistical courtesies, a full water bucket on the porch each morning, wood split and stacked by the kitchen door without being asked and without acknowledgement on either side. Ruth noticed. She appreciated it in the specifically Western way, which was to say she did not mention it, and made sure the coffee was ready when they came in at midday. Iris thrived. That was the word for it. Not just survived, not just improved, but thrived in the sudden accelerating way that newborns thrived, when they had enough food and warmth and a consistent voice to orient toward. She began to fill out the alarming angular newborn thinness, rounding slightly at the cheeks and wrists. She began to be awake for longer intervals, and to spend those intervals in the focused, intense observation of her immediate world that suggested she was compiling information and had opinions about what she found. She watched me for 20 minutes this morning. Will reported at supper on the fourth day, with the tone of someone reporting on a sophisticated intelligence operation. Just watched. Didn't blink. I blinked first. She'll do that, Ruth said. She's trying to figure out who you are. She knows who I am. She's making sure. Ruth looked at him across the table. You're important to her, Will. You've been here from the start. She knows your voice. Will processed this with great seriousness. Then he said, I've been talking to her. When Pa's outside, I tell her about things. What kind of things? The ranch, the horses, what it looks like when it rains over the canyon. He shrugged the specific teenage shrug that meant something mattered and was trying not to show it. I told her about Ma. Ruth kept her voice even. What did you tell her? I told her Ma was stubborn and sang bad and had the loudest laugh of anyone I ever knew. He looked at his plate. I told her Ma would have loved her so much it was stupid. That's what Ma always said about things she loved. She'd say, I love this so much it's just stupid. And then she'd laugh. His voice held on the last sentence by a thread, but it held. I didn't want Iris to not know that. Ruth put her hand over Will's on the table. Just for a moment. He didn't pull away. Cole across the table was looking at his son with an expression that Ruth understood without being able to describe the specific, helpless love of a father watching his child be braver than he deserved. Braver than circumstances warranted, and being unable to do anything about it except witness it and carry it. Your mother would be proud of you, Cole said. Will looked up. Something in his face that had been braced and careful since the beginning shifted just slightly, just enough. You think so? I know so. Cole said it without decoration, flat and certain as a fact of geography. I know it the way I know anything worth knowing. The letter from Thomas came on the 5th day. Not the first one. Ruth had read that one already and set it aside. A second one, shorter, the handwriting slightly less careful, which meant Thomas was anxious, which meant Hector Vance had been in contact with him. She read it at the kitchen table while Iris slept, and Will was outside, and Cole was somewhere on the east fence line that still needed tending. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it on the table and sat with it for a while. Cole came in an hour later and saw her face and didn't ask what had happened. He poured a cup of coffee and sat down across from her and waited, which was one of the things she had come to understand about him. He did not rush people toward the thing they were working up to saying. He had a patience for waiting that most men didn't, and she had stopped being surprised by it and started being grateful for it. Hector Vance went to see Thomas, she said. He told my brother-in-law that I abandoned my legal obligations and that a judge would look poorly on a widow who couldn't be bothered to attend to her own estate. She set her hands flat on the table. He also implied that my presence out here at the home of an unmarried man would be considered relevant to my character and therefore to my legal standing. Cole was very still. "He's threatening to use where I am against me," Ruth said, "in front of a judge." "Can he do that?" "He can try."
This story was
the
posted
letter.
on the channel The
It
Rusty
has no
Saddle.
legal merit.
Please do not repost
My
it
lawyer
in
said
any
as much
form.
2 months ago. But Hector Vance doesn't need legal merit to damage my reputation in Abilene. And a damaged reputation is its own kind of weapon in a county where the judge and the leading citizens all know each other's names. Cole set his cup down. "You need to go back." "I was going to go back. I said I would. I mean soon." His voice was careful and direct, the voice he used when he was saying something that cost him and had decided to say it anyway. "Not because of what Vance is threatening. Because you've been putting it off, and every day you put it off, he gets another day to build the story he wants to tell." He held her gaze. "You need to go back and close it out, so he doesn't have anything left to work with." Ruth looked at him. "You're telling me to leave." "I'm telling you to go handle your life so you can come back and choose something." He said it with a steady directness that she recognized as the hardest kind of honesty, the kind that costs the person giving it as much as the person receiving it. "There's a difference." She heard the difference. She sat with it. "Iris isn't ready for me to leave," she said. And then more honestly, "I'm not ready to leave Iris." "I know." He turned his cup in his hands. "I know that. And I know what it costs you to hold her, and I know what it costs you to think about putting her down." He looked at her directly. "Ruth, I've been watching you for 5 days. I've seen what it does to you every time you pick her up. I've seen you work through it, every single time." He paused. "You are not using Iris to stay. You're using the distance to know if you want to come back, and I think you already know." The accuracy of that landed somewhere central and undefended. She didn't answer immediately. She got up and went to the cradle and looked at Iris, who was awake and conducting her usual comprehensive examination of the ceiling. Ruth reached down and let Iris's fingers close around her index finger. That small grip, certain and uncalculating. "If I go," Ruth said, "and I'm back in Abilene, and everything that's waiting for me there. Daniel's things, Jesse's things, the house that still smells like both of them, if all of that is around me." She stopped, started again. "It might change what I want." "It might," Cole said from behind her. "That doesn't frighten you." "Of course it frightens me." He said it plainly without armor. "But I'm not going to hold you here by not saying it. You've been held to places by grief for 2 months. I'm not going to be the next thing that holds you." Ruth looked at Iris. Iris looked back with those dark, serious, accumulating eyes. "She'll miss me," Ruth said. "Yes. She's only known me a week." "A week is her whole life," Cole said. "You're in every part of it." Ruth closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about Jesse, about the particular laugh of his full-bodied and unrestrained, the laugh of a child who had not yet learned to edit his own joy. She thought about Daniel humming under his breath. She thought about 2 graves in Abilene that she had not been able to visit a second time, because visiting them meant accepting what they were, and she had not been ready. She thought she might be getting ready. "I need to do something before I go," she said. She turned around. "I need to go to their graves, Daniel and Jesse. I haven't been able to since the funerals. I haven't gone back." She looked at Cole. "I need to go and say goodbye properly, not from a moving horse, standing still." Cole nodded slowly. Something moved across his face that was recognition and grief, and the specific quiet of a man who understood exactly what she was describing. because he was still doing the same thing, keeping Margaret in the corners, putting the box on the high shelf, not standing still long enough to feel the full weight. "When you go," he said, "do that first. Before the lawyers and the papers and Vance. Do that first." "I will." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's something I need to ask you." "Ask." "When you come back." He stopped. He pressed his lips together, and she could see him choosing his words with the care of a man who had decided to say something true, and was going to say it exactly right, or not at all. "I'm not asking you to come back for Iris, or for Will, though God knows he needs that's not." He started again. "I'm asking you to come back for yourself, because this is a place where you can stay. Not because you got stranded in a storm and had nowhere else to go, but because you chose it." Ruth looked at him for a long time. The house around them was quiet. The fire was not lit, still too warm for it. Midsummer, the evenings just beginning to soften at the edges. Iris had fallen back to sleep with Ruth's finger still loosely in her grip. Through the window, the south-facing bed that nobody had planted yet was full of the wild larkspur that bloomed without permission, purple and faithful, and completely indifferent to what had happened to the woman who had put it there. "I'm not ready to say what I'm coming back for," Ruth said carefully. "Not yet. I have too much still to settle in myself." She met his eyes. "But I'm telling you that I'm coming back. Not because you need me. Not because Iris needs me. Because when I try to picture where I'm going after Abilene, this is what I see." Cole looked at her. The guardedness he usually carried, that permanent braced quality, dropped away for a moment, and underneath it was something so open and tired and real that Ruth felt her throat close. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." She left the next morning. Cole stood on the porch with Iris against his shoulder, and Will at his side, and Ruth saddled Clementine in the early gray of a West Texas dawn that smelled like rain coming from somewhere far off. She worked efficiently without looking up because she did not trust herself with too much looking. She mounted. She looked at the three of them on the porch. Cole with the baby, he was learning how to hold Will with the careful braced back. He was learning how to release Iris with her dark eyes that were always looking for the next thing to understand. Iris reached out toward her. Both arms, the full body instinctive reaching of a baby who wanted the thing she wanted and saw no reason not to say so. The gesture went straight through Ruth like a current. 10 days, Ruth said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. 10 days, Cole said. She turned Clementine east. She did not look back. She had learned in the last 2 months that looking back while moving was its own kind of damage. You could not see where you were going and where you had been at the same time. She had to choose. So she chose forward, and she carried the image of Iris's reaching arms in her chest, where it burned like something lit on purpose. The ride to Abilene was 6 hours. She spent the first 2 hours thinking about Daniel, and the next 2 thinking about Jesse, and the last 2 thinking about nothing, just the land and the horse and the rhythm of forward motion, which was different now than it had been when she left. The direction was the same. Everything else was different. She was not running away from something. She was going towards something and coming back from it. And the distance between those 2 things turned out to be the distance between a woman who had given up and a woman who had decided quietly, without announcement, without being entirely sure how it had happened, that she had not. She rode into Abilene in the late afternoon with the sun behind her, and the town exactly as she had left it, unchanged, indifferent, going about its business, without the least awareness that she had been gone or that she had come back different. She did not go to the house first. She did not go to the lawyer. She went to the cemetery because Cole had told her to do that first, and she was finding gradually, and against the habits of a lifetime, that Cole Hargrove's instincts about hard things were worth trusting. She tied Clementine at the gate. She walked in alone. The graves were side by side the way she had insisted. Daniel and then Jesse the Stones, simple and plain. The words she had chosen in a fog of grief that had somehow produced the truest things she had. She crouched in front of Jesse's stone, and she put her hand flat against it, and she did not try to stop what happened next. The tears came, and they were not the same tears she had been crying for 2 months. Those had been frantic, desperate, the tears of someone fighting a flood with their bare hands. These were the tears of someone who had finally stopped running fast enough to turn around and look at what they were carrying. She stayed until she was done. She did not rush it. She owed them both the time. Then she stood up and wiped her face with the back of her hand, and she took Daniel's stopped watch out of her pocket. She looked at it for a long time. The hands frozen at 4:17 in the afternoon, the hour
This
Daniel
story
had
was
stopped
posted on the
breathing,
channel The
the
Rusty
hour she had
Saddle.
been holding his
Please do
hand,
not
and
repost
had
it
felt
in
the
any
exact
form.
moment it left. She wound the stem. She felt the resistance of it, the mechanism stiff from 2 months of stillness, and she wound it slowly and carefully, until she felt it give, until she heard it, the small, precise, entirely ordinary sound of a watch beginning to keep time again. She held it in her palm and listened to it tick. "I'm going to be all right," she told the stone. "I want you to know that, both of you." She felt her voice catch and she kept going. "There's a baby out there who needed someone to hold her through the worst of it, and I was there, and I was useful, and I think that's what you'd want for me." She looked at Jesse's stone. "I think that's what my boy would want. For his mama to be somewhere she's useful and not nowhere she's disappearing." She pressed her hand to the stone once more. Then she stood up straight, put the running watch back in her pocket, and walked back out the gate to where Clementine was waiting in the last light of a Kansas afternoon. She had papers to sign, a lawyer to see, a man named Hector Vance to face down one final time, and then she had somewhere to be. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco, and the particular mustiness of a room where difficult things were regularly decided. Mr. Arthur Pemberton, who had represented Ruth's interests for the better part of 3 months without once suggesting she make things easier on herself by giving Hector Vance what he wanted, stood up when she came through the door and looked at her with the careful assessment of a man who had been expecting her to arrive defeated and was recalibrating rapidly. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "you look different." "I feel different," she said. "What do we need to sign?" He told her. He was thorough and methodical, and she listened to every word which she understood he appreciated. Because in his experience, grieving widows often stopped listening somewhere around the 3rd document and had to be walked back through it. Ruth listened to all of it. She asked 4 questions, 2 of which surprised him enough that he paused before answering. She signed everything that needed signing in the order it needed signing, and she did not hesitate over any of it. When they were through the documents, Pemberton set his pen down and looked at her across the desk. "Vance came to see me," he said, 2 days ago. "I know. He went to see my brother-in-law first. He's going to file a complaint with the county judge, contesting the settlement on the grounds of he's calling it abandonment of estate. He's arguing that your absence from Abilene constitutes a voluntary relinquishment of interest." He paused. "It's not a strong argument." "It's not any argument," Ruth said. "I've been gone 3 weeks. The estate has been managed by you, the property maintained by Thomas, and I'm here now signing every document in the correct order. There is no abandonment." "No," Pemberton agreed. "There isn't. But Vance is not primarily interested in winning the legal argument. He's interested in the cost of fighting it. He believes that a woman in your circumstances," he paused, choosing his words, "will find the prospect of continued legal proceedings more exhausting than simply conceding a portion of what's rightfully hers." Ruth looked at him steadily. "He's wrong about that." "I'm beginning to see that." Pemberton allowed himself a small, precise smile. "I'll file the response this week. The judge ruled once against Vance already. He won't look kindly on a second filing without new grounds." He folded his hands on the desk. "Is there anything else?" The house closed. "The Henderson purchase finalized yesterday. The funds are in trust pending your signature, which you've now provided." He slid one more document across the desk. "That's the last of it." Ruth signed it. She set the pen down. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and looked at the signed document that meant the house on Birch Street was no longer hers, that the curtains Nora, that she corrected herself, that she herself had hung, and the floors she had scrubbed, and the bedroom where Daniel had hummed under his breath while he read all of it now belonged to the Henderson family, who would live in it and make it into something else entirely, which was exactly what should happen to a house. "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton," she said, "for all of it." "It's been my honor, Mrs. Calloway." He stood. "Where will you be if I need to reach you?" She gave him the address of the Hargrove Ranch. She gave it without hesitation and without explanation, and Pemberton wrote it down without comment, which she appreciated more than she could easily express. Thomas was waiting on the steps of his own house when she rode up, which meant he had been watching for her, which meant he had been worried, which was so completely Thomas that she felt something in her chest go warm and tired and fond all at once. He was a thin, precise man of 40 who had loved his brother with a quiet, undemonstrative devotion and transferred a portion of that love to Ruth and Jesse without ever making a performance of it, and who had spent the last 2 months writing careful letters to a woman he wasn't sure was going to be all right and not saying so directly in any of them. He looked at her now the way Pemberton had looked at her, recalibrating. "You look like yourself," he said. "So people keep telling me." "I mean the version of yourself from before." He said it carefully. "I wasn't sure I'd see that again." Ruth dismounted and tied Clementine and stood in front of her brother-in-law and felt the full weight of everything they had both survived to be standing here on this ordinary afternoon. "I wasn't sure either," she said. "For a while." He put his arms around her, then briefly and firmly, the hug of a man who was not naturally demonstrative and was doing it anyway because the situation warranted it, and he had decided to be equal to the situation. She held on for a moment. Then they stepped apart, and both of them straightened, and that was that. "Hector Vance came here," Thomas said. "I know. Pemberton told me. I've handled it. He said things about your character, about where you've been." His jaw tightened in the specific way of a mild man who had been pushed past a threshold he hadn't known he had. "I told him to get off my property." Ruth looked at her brother-in-law. "You did?" "I did." He said it with the slightly surprised dignity of a man who had discovered under pressure that he had more spine than he'd previously catalogued. "He didn't like it. I didn't care." "Thomas." She looked at him. "Thank you." "He spoke about Jesse," Thomas said. His voice went quiet on the name. "He implied the things he said about Jesse Ruth. I won't repeat them. But I want you to know that there is not one person in this town who believes what he said. Not one." Ruth breathed in slowly. She had been bracing for this, had been bracing for it since Cole had told her what Vance said in the Trading Post, and she had carried the brace of it all the way from West Texas, and all the way through Pemberton's office, and here it finally was delivered in Thomas's quiet voice on his front steps, and it landed not the way she'd expected. Not like a blow. Like something being set down. Like the moment after you realize a feared thing has already happened, and you survived it, and the fearing was worse than the fact. "I know," she said. "I know they don't." "Are you all right?" "Yes." She meant it. She could feel that she meant it. "I went to the graves this morning, before anything else." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "How was that?" "Necessary," she said. "It was necessary, and I should have done it months ago, and I couldn't." She looked at the street. The familiar, ordinary street she had known for 11 years, and felt its familiarity as something historical rather than present the way you felt the familiarity of a place you had grown out of. "I wound Daniel's watch." Thomas looked at her. "The one that stopped?" "Yes." He understood what she was saying. She could see it on his face, the comprehension of it, the weight of it, and underneath both of those things, something that was very close to relief. "He'd be glad," Thomas said finally. "You know he'd be glad." "I'm starting to," she said. She stayed one night. She stayed because Thomas asked her to, and because she owed him the dinner and the conversation and the chance to see with his own eyes that she was in fact all right, and because there were a few things in the house on Birch Street Her house until yesterday, the Henderson house, now that she had packed into a trunk 6 weeks ago and left with Thomas for safekeeping, and she needed to collect them. The trunk had Jesse's drawings in it. 3 of them made with chalk on brown paper, abstract and vivid and completely recognizable as the work of a child who had strong opinions about color and no concerns about staying inside any lines. She had also packed his other boot, the left one, which she had been keeping paired with the right one in her saddlebag, as if keeping them together meant something. She took both boots out of the trunk and held them together for a long time.
This story was posted
Then
on the
she put
channel
right
The
one
Rusty
back in the
Saddle.
trunk.
Please do not
She
repost
kept
it
the
in any
left one.
form.
One was enough to carry. One was the right number. She packed Jesse's drawings with the care they deserved, wrapping them in cloth, putting them at the top of her saddlebag where they would not be crushed. She packed the small framed photograph of Daniel that she had not been able to look at for 2 months and could now. She packed one of Nora's. She stopped herself again. One of her own herb jars that she had brought from the Abilene house rosemary, because rosemary grew anywhere, and she intended to need it. She did not pack the clock from the mantel. She left it for the Hendersons. The one in her pocket was running fine. Hector Vance found her in the street the next morning. She had been expecting it. He was the kind of man who could not let things conclude without inserting himself into the conclusion, who experienced other people's closure as a personal affront. He came out of the hotel and planted himself between her and Clementine, with the deliberate placement of a man who had been waiting and intended to make that waiting count. He was larger than she'd imagined from Thomas's descriptions. Red-faced, expensively dressed in the way of a man who confused the cost of his clothes with the quality of his character. He had the bearing of someone who had gotten his way for so long that alternatives had ceased to feel real to him. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "I think we should talk." "I don't," Ruth said. She kept walking toward Clementine. He stepped sideways to stay in her path. "You signed the papers." "I did. That money was awarded to me by a county judge after a thorough review of the documentation that you and your attorneys apparently did not expect to exist." She stopped. She looked at him directly, with the particular quality of attention she had developed over the last 3 weeks. The attention of a woman who had sat up through fevers and storms and hard nights and long silences, with a man who did not flinch from difficult things, and had learned by proximity something of that quality herself. "It exists, Mr. Vance. The judge read it. He ruled. You lost. I intend to appeal. That is your right. It will cost you considerably more than the appeal is worth, and you will lose again because the documentation does not change, and neither does the law." She took one step toward him. "Now I've been patient with you because you were my husband's partner, and he spoke of you as a man of some intelligence, and I have been willing to extend the benefit of the doubt that the last 3 months have been grief and frustration, rather than genuine malice." She looked at him steadily. "But you spoke about my son, to my brother-in-law, and to men in a trading post 9 miles from a ranch where I was caring for a sick newborn and minding my own business. You made statements about my character using my dead child as the instrument of them." Vance's expression shifted. Not remorse, he was not built for remorse, but something that recognized it had miscalculated the opposition. "I am going to get on my horse now," Ruth said, "and I am going to ride west, and I am not going to think about you again. But I want you to understand something before I do." She held his gaze without effort. "I am not a woman in a weakened state who can be pressured into giving up what's rightfully mine. I was. For a while I was exactly that. But I am not that woman today, and I will not be her tomorrow, and every legal avenue you try will be answered by Mr. Pemberton, who is smarter than you, and I will not lose sleep over any of it." A pause. "Move, Mr. Vance." He moved. She untied Clementine and mounted and rode west out of Abilene without looking back, and it felt nothing like the last time she had ridden out of Abilene. The last time she had been running. This time she was returning. The distinction between those two things had turned out to be the difference between a woman coming apart and a woman coming together. and Ruth Calloway rode with that distinction in her sternum like something lit on purpose, warm and steady, and unwilling to go out. She pushed Clementine harder than was strictly necessary, and apologized to the horse for it, and pushed harder anyway. She came over the ridge on the 7th day, 3 days ahead of what she'd said, because she was done with ahead of schedule, and because the prairie between Abilene and the Palo Duro Canyon had been passing under Clementine's hooves with the dragging slowness of distance that wanted to be somewhere else, and she had stopped pretending she wasn't in a hurry. The farmhouse was below her in the late afternoon light, the barn and the lean-to and the south-facing bed with the wild larkspur still blooming purple and faithful at the edge of the yard. She sat on the ridge for exactly 3 seconds, looking at it and feeling the full complicated weight of what it meant that seeing it felt like coming home when she had only been there for 10 days and it had never been hers. Then she rode down. She heard Iris before she saw anyone. Not crying. The other thing, the new thing, the earnest vocalization that Will had reported, and she had missed with a physical specificity that surprised her every time she thought about it. The sound of a baby who had discovered that noise produced results and had decided to make as much of it as possible. She followed the sound to the side of the house and found them the way she had somehow known she would find them. Cole sitting on the ground with his back against the wall and Iris propped on his outstretched legs. Both of them engaged in what appeared to be a conversation of great mutual importance, in which Iris was doing most of the talking. Will was 3 feet away, sitting on an overturned bucket, contributing periodic commentary that Iris appeared to be weighing seriously. Cole heard Clementine first. He looked up. He went very still. Iris kept talking. Ruth dismounted. She stood with the reins in her hand and looked at the 3 of them at Cole, with his careful open face at Will, who had scrambled to his feet and was looking at her with the expression of someone who had been hoping for something, and was now managing the complicated task of having gotten it at Iris, who was still talking to the space where Cole's attention had been, and was only now registering the change. "You're early," Cole said. "I rode fast." "Why?" She looked at him. She had spent 7 days deciding how to answer that question, which had seemed like a reasonable amount of time, and what she had come to was not a speech. It was just the truth, the kind of truth that did not need decoration. "Because I wanted to get back," she said. He got to his feet. He picked Iris up as he rose one smooth, practiced motion. The motion of a man who had learned in 10 days how to do something he hadn't known how to do before. And he stood and looked at Ruth, and his face was doing that thing that she had come to understand was Cole Hargrove at his most unguarded, everything he was feeling visible on the surface, undefended and unashamed. Iris saw Ruth. She reached for her immediately, both arms, the full body reaching of a baby who knew exactly what she wanted and was not interested in being subtle about it. Ruth stepped forward and took her. She held Iris against her chest and felt the warm, familiar weight of her, the small hand that came up immediately and found her collar, and held on, and she pressed her cheek to the top of Iris's head and stood there and breathed. "Vance," Cole said after a moment. "Handled. The papers. Signed. All of them." She kept her cheek against Iris. "The house is the Hendersons now." "How was that?" "Right," she said. "It felt right, which I didn't expect." She pulled back enough to look at him. "I went to the graves first, like you said." Something moved across his face. "How was that?" "I wound Daniel's watch," she said. "I let it run." Cole looked at her for a long time. The afternoon was quiet around them. The particular stillness of the hour before the light changed, the hour when everything went gold and unhurried, and it was possible to believe the world had paused to pay attention. "I did something while you were gone," he said. "I want to show you." He led her around to the south side of the house. She came around the corner and stopped. Someone had turned the earth in Nora's garden bed, turned it and edged it and raked it smooth and along the back edge of it in a line that was not perfectly straight, because 11-year-old boys doing their first garden work were not primarily concerned with straight lines, were the beginnings of new seedlings just breaking the surface. Small and green and definite. Will did the turning, Cole said from behind her. I told him what it was for. He decided he wanted to do the planting himself. What did you plant? She said, though she already knew. Will found the seed packet in Nora's things. She'd ordered it last winter, had it put away for spring. He paused. Larkspur. Ruth stood in front of the garden bed that Nora Hargrove had planned and never planted, and that her son had put into the ground with his own hands in the week that Ruth had been gone. And she felt tears arrive, and she did not stop them. She let them come. She was getting better at that, at letting things arrive instead of managing them to the door and turning them away. Will appeared at her shoulder. He looked at the seedlings with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who had done a real thing and knew it. Mrs. Sweeney said they'll come in purple, he said. She said once they're established, they'll come back every year without being asked. They will, Ruth said. Her voice was rough. She did not apologize for it. They're very stubborn flowers.
This story was
Ma
posted
would've
on the
liked
channel
that,
The Rusty Saddle.
Will said.
Please do not repost it in
Yes,
any form.
Ruth said. She would have. She felt Cole's hand on her shoulder then. Not tentatively. Firmly, the way he had put his arm around her the first time, as if he had decided something and saw no reason to be uncertain about it. She did not step away. She put her hand over his and held it there. The three of them stood in front of Nora's garden in the last gold light of a West Texas afternoon. Iris on Ruth's hip, making her continuous commentary to the world, Will with dirt still on his hands from the planting he'd done 3 days ago. And not entirely washed off Cole, with his hand on Ruth's shoulder, and his daughter on her hip, and his son beside him, and the farm behind him, that had Margaret in every corner of it, and was becoming slowly and painfully, and without anyone's permission, something else as well. I brought seeds back from Abilene, Ruth said. Different variety, different color. She shifted Iris higher on her hip. If Will has room in the bed. Will looked at her with an expression that was 11 years old and entirely ancient at the same time. What color? White. They bloom later in the season, through August. She looked at the bed. Plant them next to the purple ones, and they'll hold the bed through the whole summer. Will considered this with great seriousness. Yeah, he said. Okay, I've got room. Cole said nothing. He just tightened his hand on her shoulder once briefly and then left it where it was. Iris reached up and grabbed a fistful of Ruth's hair and held on with the complete and uncomplicated authority of a baby who had decided this was simply the arrangement and could not imagine why anyone would argue with it. Ruth untangled the tiny fingers gently, and Iris immediately grabbed her collar instead, which was her usual second choice, and apparently satisfactory. I'm not going to tell you it's simple, Ruth said. She was talking to Cole, but she didn't look at him. She looked at the garden, at the seedlings just breaking ground, at the white afternoon sky above the canyon. What I'm feeling. What this is. I've got grief in me that isn't finished, and you've got the same, and this place has Nora in every corner. And I have Daniel and Jesse in every room of myself. She paused. I'm not pretending any of that is resolved. Neither am I, Cole said. Good. She looked at Iris. Then we can be unresolved together and not be surprised by it. He turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. And in the particular quality of the light and the silence and the small warm weight of Iris between them, she saw on his face everything she had been learning to read over 10 days and 1 week apart. The grief and the steadiness and the specific raw, unhidden thing that sat underneath both of those, the thing that had no armor left on it, because he had long since run out of the energy required to keep it covered. Ruth, he said. I know, she said. I know. He put his arm around her shoulders, not carefully this time. Firmly, the way a man held something he had decided to keep, the way you held something you had almost lost and were not interested in holding loosely. She leaned into it. Just slightly. Just enough. Will looked at the two of them, then at his sister, then at the garden, then back at the two of them, with the expression of a boy performing a rapid and comprehensive assessment of the situation and arriving at a conclusion he found acceptable. "I'll go start supper," he said. "Will," Cole said. "Pa." "Thank you. For the garden." Will shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a boy who had done something that mattered enormously and was not going to make a thing of it. "Somebody had to plant it," he said. Then he went inside. The door closed behind him. Iris made a sound between Ruth and Cole, clear and declarative, and impossible to argue with the sound of a baby who was stating a position and expected it to be heard. Ruth looked down at her. Iris looked up with those dark, serious, accumulating eyes and opened her mouth and produced a sound that was not yet a word, but was unambiguously the beginning of one. "She's been doing that all week," Cole said, "like she's trying to say something specific and is working up to it." "She'll get there," Ruth said. "She's very determined. Wonders where she gets that." Ruth looked at him. He was almost smiling. The real kind, the kind that rearranged his whole face and came from somewhere deep and genuine and made no apology for being there. She had seen it once before, and she was glad to see it again. "Come inside," she said. "I brought coffee from Abilene. The good kind, not the kind you've been burning." "I don't burn the coffee." Cole. "Every morning," he admitted. "Every single morning," she agreed. "Come inside." They went in. The door closed behind them. And outside in the last of the afternoon light, the larkspur that Will Hargrove had planted with his own hands 3 days ago in the bed his mother had planned and never gotten to fill, stood in their thin new rows. In the Texas earth no taller than a thumbnail, fragile and green, and entirely committed to the business of growing stubborn and faithful, and completely certain the way living things were when someone who loved them had put them in the ground and given them enough reason to come back. Ruth Calloway had ridden west to disappear. She had not disappeared. She had arrived.